Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. Thank you, Jasmine, for doing the land acknowledgement as well as the anti-Black racism acknowledgement. I feel like sometimes those get forgotten in certain groups that we're in. So yes, I'm Shauna. I have the honor of being here today, and I thank the Kajenga Wellness team for extending the invitation to have me come out this evening and to speak with everyone. I do have visuals. I do talk pretty fast by all means. Let me know in the chat if I need to slow down. This is something that I'm passionate about. So once I get excited and adrenaline starts going, it gets pretty quick. And I'm open to feedback throughout the entire evening. We're going to work through everything together. So if there's questions, by all means, raise your hand up and let me know. I want it to be interactive. I'm going to give a lot of information. We're not going to get into all the details tonight just because, as I'm sure you're aware, the spectrum of autism is very complex and it's not going to fit in one night. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you all.
Yes, and I believe you mentioned this as well, Shauna. If anybody has any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A section. I will notify Shauna. And also we have Annika here as well. Annika is, I believe, the founder of Anaya's Haven, which I believe she will get into more detail as well during our presentation. So I will
We'll definitely
notify either Shauna or Annika, and they will be able to answer your questions during the presentation or after the presentation.
Absolutely. So I have left room during and as well as afterwards. Okay, so and just to let you all know, it can be hard to talk about autism. Autism is not easy. It is a label that we've gotten used to hearing, but you have to understand that they're still people. And so when we talk about working with individuals with autism, we have to be very mindful as to be respectful towards them and always keeping their best interest at heart. As people who support individuals with autism, we tend to go at it with our own mindset and how we perceive what is best for them. When they are in a position where they can advocate, I suggest we do that and include them in the conversation. If they are not in a position where they can advocate for themselves, then we need to be mindful as to what their strengths are and then operate from that position. Okay, I'll go through our agenda for today. I'll do a bit of a basic definition. We'll talk about some experiences in regards to autism. We will touch on intersectionality because, again, you're not just having autism, you are also a Black person. We're going to do a session here. We're going to connect with Annika, as Jasmine has mentioned. I'm going to give you all a few tips and tricks in regards to communication, sensory, and behaviors. We're going to have a moment of honesty and conversation towards the end, and then we'll leave room for questions and answers. If there are any questions that are asked today and I do not have the answer at the tip of my tongue, then I encourage you to reach out to Kajenga and we will look to find just an answer for you and what suits your current situation, okay? So what is autism? So autism is also known as ASD. It is a complex developmental condition. It is all about the person's neurodevelopment status, okay? And so it does have challenges in regards to social interaction, speech, communication. There is a lot that touches on other type of diagnoses. So you'll hear about ADHD as an attachment. You'll hear about OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And you'll also hear about pervasive developmental disorder as well as an attachment to it, because some of the behaviors you'll learn about today, including fixation and being stuck, and that is also part of some of the diagnoses, okay? So the effects of autism or ASD range in severity, hence it's a spectrum. We're used to hearing about in the news, people may have gotten jobs. That's only one portion of it. There are some who are not able to and they require more support. So there is a wide range. One term that people may be familiar with is Asperger's. That is now not a separate diagnosis, that is also looped into autism. And so I put a visual here to just kind of stimulate your mind a little bit as to some of the symptoms you may see that may cause a bit of concern as a parent or a caregiver, and you're thinking, this is something I want to definitely keep note of. So whether they prefer to play alone, They are not interested in eye contact or cuddles or touch. So there's a bit of an aversion to that. You see there's a bit of a fixation. So they're stuck on something very particular. You will see some issues with some muscular movements, some motor difficulties. So if they're eating and it's not quite working out, whether it's they're not able to hold the fork, whether they are eating very fast, sleep disorders, and it may be coupled with a learning disability. Common attributes for autism. Typically, the diagnosis is found between the age of 2 to 4. That is where you'll see some of the regression in the development. The cause is unknown. Now, I know there's lots of speculation out there, and you're going to hear people come up with various things that they believe attribute to autism, but there is no one specific way. And so one thing that I've heard is in regards to spiking high fevers, and that changes some of the neurodevelopment, and their child was later on diagnosed with autism. So it can come about in various ways. I don't want to freak you out about fevers, by the way. Just giving you an example. So according to the CDC, 1 in 59 children are estimated to have autism. And so that has changed over the years. I know that when I first started out in the field, the statistics were 1 in 100. Now people come up with different speculations again as to why the number has changed so drastically. And you'll see here that there are boys who tend to be diagnosed more than girls, and that's particularly because of how the symptoms are displayed. Girls, would come with the ideology of being more reserved. Girls typically like to do things that are a little slower paced, a little more calmed down and off to themselves. We talk about the gender norms of girls going to play dollhouse by themselves, and then that's kind of just the expectation. Whereas with boys, you'd think, oh no, why is he always alone? There must be something going on. And so you'll see that there's a higher diagnosis in boys because something's a little more present based on what our gender norms are for them. In regards to the statistics, particularly around marginalized communities, there isn't a lot of research, unfortunately, that labels what race and identities present more with autism. There has been some speculation that it is found higher in white communities, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in regards to how we as a Black community tend to shy away from looking for a support sometimes or to acknowledging that there is something different going on. Some of the behaviors that you will, or you could see, not all of them, will be flailing of hands, and I'll definitely do a demonstration. So it looks like this. You'll see rocking as well, back and forth as one of the indicators. As I mentioned, fixation, so that's, stuck on something very particular. They may have skills in a very specific area. So whether it be, they're able to take apart a radio and put it back together as they're a little bit older, or when they're smaller, you'll wonder how are they able to do art so well or pick up on music so well. And then you occasionally may see some meltdowns. And that is also very fair because that is them as well trying to navigate the world and process information at a very, very different way that we do. So I want to ask a question. What do you all feel are some of the feelings that as caregivers or, parents, loved ones, general family members have towards autism or hearing an autism diagnosis? All right, so we have, scared, absolutely. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to think of other feelings?
Fears of the future, we have that as well.
Yes.
Defensive.
Very much so, yes. I see denial pop up, absolutely. That's very real, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna just throw up a couple more, keep the conversation going. So at times there is confusion, disbelief, guilt, shame, uncertainty, thank you. I feel something from children with autism should be excluded. Yep, absolutely. Believing they're not capable, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. Thank you for that. Anger, relief, motivated. So I know that we can think of some of the negative feelings that come with hearing a diagnosis for a loved one, but we have to recognize that sometimes hearing, providing a bit of a solution gives you understanding, and that can be relief for families. It gives them an idea as to where to go next. When there is a label attached, there is usually a bit of a pathway to navigate, whether it be, evidence programming before that they've done, particularly with autism. And they may be motivated. They think, you know what, this is what life may look like. I want to figure out how to do all I can do and make it the best that I can. And so various feelings, not all are negative. All right. Thank you all for that. Now, I definitely want to highlight next, because, Kajanga does focus on Black families, the intersectionality that is very real. And so, sorry about that, everyone. There we go. When we talk about denial, we talk about fear, we don't want to stand out. As Black people, we walk down the street, we already stand out a lot of the times, right? We go into stores, people follow us, we stand out. And we don't want an added reason for people to be looking at us, let's be honest, right? And the research is limited, but we know that with history and how the medical community has treated people who are Black, we have a reason to not want to engage with mental health services, with doctors, and wanting to have people pry and look into life. There's also a lot that comes from, just how we've been raised, that the secrets of what's going on with our family stays in our family. What happens in our house stays in our house. But we have to be recognizing that at this point, it may be bigger than what we're able to manage. So when we look at generational trauma, we think about how we've been disciplined ourselves growing up, and what that means for someone who may have delayed cognition, who may not understand what's going on. Are we teaching them this is how we deal with our issues and our feelings? Is it something that corrects behavior? So all those things play into the day-to-day of someone with autism. I think about systemic oppression, whether or not we have access to services. Marginalized folks live in, poverty by postal code. And so we think about what is available in the postal code and what's available to even have, like whether it's transportation to get to somewhere, whether it's having the finances to get to a program, whether it's finances to even register for a program. So socioeconomic status is definitely a big part of, how families are looking for resources and whether or not they're going to engage with them. Then on the other hand, we also have to deal with stereotypes as Black people. We recognize that with autism, there may be a delayed in processing information. There may be burst of energy. So you may see someone, laughing uncontrollably. You might see someone, dart away and then run back uncontrollably. You might see yelling and screaming and, a full-on tantrum. But we recognize that as Black people, especially as, I identify as a woman, the stereotype that comes with being an angry Black woman is also something that someone with autism has to carry. And so those are different layers we have to think about when servicing or just supporting someone with autism or being part of their support network, whether it be, your sister's child or your best friend's, uncle, whatever the case may be. And then when you think about advocacy with service providers, if you are able to get resources, and that, like I mentioned, is a challenge, recognizing what the supports are in place for them and how they typically navigate the outside world that is not made for Black people. So I want to highlight that, in certain scenarios where someone may be aggressive, for example, police are also considered as part of the response. Now, we all have social media. We all have media in general. We recognize how we operate in this world. Police don't have the training and don't necessarily have our best interests at the forefront. And so when we think about using the police as a response to mental health breakdowns, we have to be very mindful. We have to be very mindful as to whether or not they have any training. You may get one or two officers that have some relatability. They may have a cousin or someone who has autism themselves. But we build it into support plans. As service providers, it gets built in because we recognize that at some point, things may be out of our control. As a parent, you never want to be in a position to have to call the police on your loved one. It's not the first thing that comes to mind. You want to stick it out as long as you can. but there are points where we have to have conversations about whether or not this is in, you know, our capabilities. Um, there is something which may also not, I'm sorry, hasn't always worked towards our favor when it comes to partnership with police services. Now, in your local area, there's usually a police force attached to it. They do have police liaisons that you can actually walk in, have meetings, talk about profiles, and you can create profiles at your local division about your loved one. Um, in itself, it can be a challenge. I've, worked through this myself, and, you get officers who say, we don't have this system sometimes, and they just may be lazy. You can always ask to speak to somebody else. So I don't want you to give up. You're gonna have to advocate. This is part of the journey of supporting someone. And so, especially if you're having an individual who likes to, run off, go missing, and you have to be in a position where you're calling police for filing missing persons reports because you don't know where your loved one went. There's value in setting up a profile with the police officers, having a readily available picture, thinking about typical places they may run to. And that way, when, or if this is a behavior you see, we know how to support your loved one. On a regular day, in the world that would be perfect, we want to talk about how to interact with law enforcement. And this is all based on the cognition of your loved one. So when we talk about teaching someone with autism, because for them, repetitive behavior is part of the diagnosis, teaching them also requires a lot of repetition as well. And so in order to teach them something, you have to be very clear as to what you're trying to accomplish, and then really make sure numerous times over a span of time that you are repeating the same thing, creating as much consistency as possible. And so when we talk about, scenarios of when to anticipate law enforcement to be there, it could be teaching them, when you're in the store and you try to take something we didn't pay for, they may call police. That may be a scenario you want to work through based, again, on the cognition level of your loved one. So we talk about ways to kind of have a plan, very individual specific always, about what you can do. So what are the phrases you want to teach that person when they are approached by police officers, whether it be their address, or it could be their name or the phone number of a loved one, that is something that they are used to repeating, and then they can repeat to a police officer when face to face. Teaching them about safe hands. It is a common thing that we hear about, not just for aggression, but this is also life-changing for people who occupy Black bodies, is recognizing that our hands need to be visible and empty. So it's, when you see a police officer, put down your toy, or when you see an officer, put down your bag. We have to have, as Black people, these conversations with our loved ones, regardless as to how to navigate with police officers. But there's an added layer to really adhere to the person's cognition when having to deal with this. I'm always concerned about putting the diagnosis of our loved one on the forefront. We want them to be able to have as much of a normal life as possible with as neurotypical folk. But also, depending on their cognition, you may want to teach them and also have them their own personalized identification. So when you see runners going out and they have their music attached to their arm, this may be something that you would invest in for your loved one who may have the skills to go out for independent time. It may be someone who does have a risk of running away, and you're building up and teaching them to always carry their wallet or always carry their armband, and that will have their identification in it. On the identification, you're going to list their name, their diagnosis, some of the triggers that may cause a reaction. So if there's someone that does not like to be touched, for example, you put that on there, because if they're trying to, get into a bit of a back and forth with police officers, and as we know can happen, and police officers are trying to put their hands on an individual, you're going to see a spike in behavior. And so putting that on there to recognize that is something that may take place is also a big deal, especially if the loved one is nonverbal or has select verbalism. You need to be able to help support them to communicate what their needs are. Phone numbers and addresses are also helpful. Not in too much detail, so I would suggest one or the other, just because obviously for your own privacy and safety. And then we want to talk about developing self-calming and coping strategies. So, I talked about the flailing of the hands earlier. That is something that we call stimming. It is an outward approach for them to regulate what's happening inside for them. And so that is to help with some of the emotional regulation and manage the anxiety when it comes to transitions, just something new, being in a new environment, things that make them uncomfortable. Any questions so far? Can't quite see the chat box. Okay. So
sorry, no questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So at this time, I want to introduce Annika. And I didn't want to get too much into the spiel that I've got going on later on, because I do see so much value in having Annika joining us today. Annika, I won't talk too long and introduce you too much, because I want you to be able to speak for yourself. But Annika is someone that I've known for a long time, who is supporting someone with autism, and has a vast amount of personal knowledge and information to share. And so I will be asking Annika some questions, and Annika has graciously agreed to answer them. All right. Hi, Annie.
Hey, Seana. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for coming.
Good to see you. All right. So I will not talk too much and do your full introduction, because I want you to share. That's, you have a very specific insight that I think is very valuable to the conversation. So the first question I want to ask you is, can you tell us about your journey with autism?
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name's Annika, and as Seana shared, and I'm also a mother. My daughter was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2.5. She's now going to be 16 in June. And I also grew up with my brother, who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3.5. And now Andre's going to be 34 in July. So those are my two really personal experiences. I've been caring for Andre ever since I was 8. It's pretty much. So I was, I'm his older sister, and it was just expected that I was designated to care for him, which I did. And then I later on had Anaya. So those are my two very close personal experiences in the autism world. My first introduction was Andre.
Thank you. What have you found is the big difference for you, being a sibling versus being a parent of someone with autism?
Wow. Well, it feels like I've been parenting since Andre. And a lot of people don't discuss this, but in the sibling world, a lot of times there's a lot of responsibility put on what you would call typical siblings to take care for, look after their siblings. And with Andre, initially, the only difference was, I was younger and in high school, so I could walk away, hang out with my friends, and leave that to mom. I didn't really know how she was navigating the system. I didn't really, care much. My main role was to protect him when he was in my care. Whereas with Anaya, now there's the worry. I saw a few parents talk about worry and concern, and I have all of those. I'm concerned about her future and how she'll be seen as an adult, and what does that look like, and what does quality of life look like for her? So the worries, and I think I had to kind of navigate that after my mom passed away. I then became Andre's POA. So I then became his, and I had to navigate that world, and it became very frightening because Naya was right behind him. And, you really do begin to see the differences in what you can access based on socioeconomical status, which you mentioned. And that was really heartbreaking, and it caused a lot of concern, but there are ways to navigate it. And so I really would like to talk about that as well. But I think the difference is, the connection is, that's someone else's problem, and you kind of dip in, and then when it becomes your own life experience, it then, you know, creates a whole bunch of different anxiety, can create a bunch of different anxieties. You know, you love this person. When you give birth to a child, you have all these expectations. And, you know, when Anaya got her diagnosis, a lot of that shifted, and I had to learn how to navigate this new world.
Thank you for that. All right. So as a family, what was it like for you to hear of Anaya's diagnosis?
Can we just be really honest?
Yeah, come on.
Raw? Okay. So yeah, I cried. I remember we were in the doctors. So what happened was, I was actually happy to hear you mention it earlier. Naya got a fever after her second dose of MMR vaccine. And I'm not here to down vaccines, especially not during this time, but she got her second dose and she had a really bad reaction to it and got a fever. And she was in and out of sick kids for 2 weeks with this fever. Her white blood cell count was low. And after her white blood cell count came back, the doctor was like, oh, she's fine. But I looked in her eyes and she didn't seem like the same bubbly baby initially that I had. And after that, about a couple months after that, she stopped hitting her markers at the daycare. And when I had Anaya, I was young. I was 21, 22 when I had her. And so I went back to college, and the resource teacher at the daycare contacted me and was like, hey, you know, something's going up with your baby. You know, maybe you should start getting her checked out for different things. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, you know, she's not hitting her markers like her peers, and we can't advance her to the next class until she hits these markers. So we think you need to start getting her tested for, we got her hearing tested. We were tested for all different things. And finally the diagnosis was autism. And there was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of shame. I was thinking about, you know, what did I do? You know, was it something I did? And there was just all these emotions that came. There was definitely a loss and a grieving that had to take place because, you know, no one is ever really prepared for that diagnosis, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, I had to.
Absolutely. So can you describe what a day-to-day looks like with Anaya?
Well, it's really cool because Anaya you've been one of her support systems. And I just want to share, Seana also does private work, and she was very instrumental in working with Anaya, as well as other people in school and in the community. So Anaya's, you know, really self-sufficient and at this point, so it's really fun to kind of watch her do her thing. Typical day with Anaya, we get up, she's very routine based, which is a common trait with individuals with autism. And it's just like when you think about regular people, you know, you want to know what you're doing next, right? So, and so I just have to map that out for her differently than I would for maybe a neurotypical individual. So, Anaya, I write out her list every morning. She has actually a whiteboard, and we literally have a list of 10. And since COVID, she's been home. She's been homeschooling. And that was also another transition because she's a very social kid. And so, you know, we start the morning with breakfast, maybe a chore. She gets herself ready. Sometimes she's even ready, most times she's usually ready before me to start the day. She's a very routine person. We do sometimes breakfast prep, snack prep together. She goes through her computer. She actually seems to be adapting quite well to online, not as engaged as much as she would have been if it was an in-person experience. So that's something we have to kind of work through. And then also Naya has designated chores that she does throughout the week. So she washes her lunch dishes. She's now learning how to vacuum. She's responsible for taking out recycling and trash in our home. And she's been doing that consistently for a while now. So she takes out the recycling or the trash either every other day. And she's actually really excited because I kind of give her a little bit of independence. We live in a really small building. So I give her independence to go to the trash room, and I freak out until she comes back. But, you know, she's happy for that. She gets so excited to do it. So that's pretty much our day. It's just kind of going through each day task. And then of course, just given the fact there's been a lot of change in terms of access to community services, I've become the parent, the respite worker, the activity coordinator. So we have to incorporate like outdoor activities, things so that she can also get some recreation.
Absolutely. So I do see a couple questions coming in. I don't want you to feel like I'm ignoring you. We'll get to
No,
those after.
let's make this a conversation.
Yeah.
Please.
I just want to ask this one question first, and then I want to jump to these questions actually. So what has your experience been with navigating school for Anaya?
Tough. So just going back to socioeconomical status or even address, a lot of times the school board will not listen to you, and you really have to be prepared to advocate, fight for what you want. And I'm naturally not a fighter by nature. So I've learned that like folding too soon, can be at a disadvantage. So if you know of a program or a school that might be out of your district, do not be afraid to go to like a trustee, and just, they will listen if you push. Initially, so with me, I went to a private Christian school. So when the school didn't go my way, I turned around and I invested in Anaya and I did private education for a bit. Because I just felt like it was just overwhelming to navigate that. So when she was in junior kindergarten, when she first started, there were some behavioral issues, and she was in a diagnostic classroom, and the teacher was singling her out and just calling it out. And I thought that was weird because she was in a diagnostic classroom, so you'd think that that would be the place where they'd be prepared for behaviors like that, but there was always complaints and constantly sending her home. So I got frustrated and I put her into a Montessori school for autism that was at the beaches. And it was very expensive, but I made that sacrifice. And through that, they also incorporated ABA in their system. So now I was able to get a good chunk of language from that program for 2 years. Then when we returned back to the public school system, we had a few good connections with teachers, but again, I will say there are hidden gems within the GTA. There are really great autistic programs. I know there's some schools in Richmond Hill, Danforth High School, but you really have to just do your research and fight for what you want and be prepared to fight. And if they're telling you need to be here just based on location, don't believe it. You have options and you do have rights. It's been quite a tough journey. Right now, I wanted Anaya to go to Osler, but she's currently placed at another high school. So we're just now trying to navigate what our next steps are going to be after COVID.
All right, so I'll jump into some of the questions that are coming through. I think this one might be for me. So it says, is autism genetic? So there is a speculation about autism. Oh, it's changing. Okay. There is speculation in regards to the genetic makeup. So there is, you will see cases where there are multiple diagnoses in one family, but you will also see in some families where there are no experience with autism, and then you see someone who has a child with autism. So there is no 100% answer, for that question. But I'm happy you asked. The second one here is, how has the pandemic affected Anaya? And are you having to have a more structured routine than pre-COVID?
Definitely. Yeah. So the pandemic has affected Anaya's social circle. Prior to the pandemic, Anaya was really involved in the community. She attended an after-school program not too far from our home twice a week. She also had personal respite on the weekends where she would do social things with her respite worker and another participant. She also was in Taekwondo with Variety Village, and she also was enrolled in the music program at Bloorview Children's Hospital. And so all of those things obviously are now at a halt, and that was really hard for her. Anaya is very musical. For those who don't know, she sings and she plays the piano. And so what I've had to do was literally, like I said, create a whiteboard and incorporate all of those things within her day. And have listed so that we can still keep it going. So we still do music. I teach her as best as I can. I dropped out of piano years ago, but I teach her as best as I can. And literally have a list of 1 to 10, and the whiteboard, I list what each task is, as well as incorporating her school blocks. And then she wipes it and feels like accomplished by completing each day. And I found that has helped reduce a lot of her anxiety surrounding such the drastic change. As well as we schedule Zoom calls with friends and family because she calls on them all the time. She mentions them in her echolali and in her speech. And I try to go outside with her when the weather's good and get some exercise and kind of just become her friend and kickball, skipping. Yeah, maybe might explore riding a bike, but we'll see.
Thank you for that. Okay, so one comment here is one person understands how you feel. They're a mother with a child who has autism, and they also care for a brother with autism.
Okay.
So similar, yeah.
Wow, I'd love to talk to you.
All right, so I'll just a couple more here. So I work with some families that have children diagnosed with autism, and when I speak to them about different organizations, they will say that they do not feel that they are helping. Have you experienced, specifically they're asking about Surrey Place, if you've had an experience with them, and what agencies did you find helpful?
Okay, yeah, so my experience with Surrey Place was the home agency that diagnosed Anaya, and I find that they're not very hands-on. Like I make an appointment to see her diagnosing doctor every 2 years. And I advocate to have like neuro testing done to see if there's any other, because sometimes autism can also come with a neighboring diagnosis or dual diagnosis. And sometimes if I notice any change in Anaya's behavior, you know, I make notes of it and then I bring it up. Recently I had a psychoeducational assessment done. Just to see where she was in terms of her development, her skills, like, you know, as you're life planning, right? So like my dream for her is to maybe have a part-time job, you know, be active in the community. And I just want to know like how that would look based on how she's developing. But again, it's all self initiated. Like I find you get the diagnosis, they give you a bunch of paper and you just kind of have to figure it out. Like, you know, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to develop Anaya's Haven is in the future to kind of provide supports to families, because there wasn't really any when my brother was coming up, and neither was I. The agencies that I do find helpful, I find Strides has been really instrumental these last couple of months. They used to be called Aislings, but they switched over to Strides.
Yeah, they amalgamated.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. So Strides is closer to where we live. I find they've been incredible in terms of providing support. They provided even free respite for us last year during the pandemic. They have a really great ABA after school program, which Anaya is a part of, and a social program. So I really have been enjoying that agency the most. And in terms of parental support, so like just getting education around resources, or even just navigating the diagnosis or being a more educated support, I like Geneva Center. They offer a lot of courses, but they have a lot of parent courses. But again, it's, you know, fee for service. So you have to use your funding or your own money in order to access it.
Yeah, thank you. I see a couple more questions. Hold on 1 second.
Get a snack? Get a snack. Sorry.
No, don't.
I'll introduce you guys to Naya when she's done. It's her snack time. It's dinner time for her. So.
Okay, so one question was, are there services for Black families in need of autism support? So there isn't one fully developed at the moment. But I know that with a lot of new agencies, their focus is on really pushing the diversity. And so they are hiring more Black workers. You can go to agencies now and request a Black intake worker who is able to help navigate some of your struggles, who can understand. And a lot of times the frontline staff tend to be people who occupy Black bodies.
True. Also, there is a Black support group that is available. And I can also send people the link. It's called BCBG. And I can send people the link. It's led by 2 parents that have 2 adult children who are on the spectrum, and they do a Zoom meeting once a month, every Tuesday evening.
Perfect.
Sorry, I hate to interject because this is such a fantastic discussion, but
Sure.
I think we would love to create a list of services that are available for families who are looking for more information on services for their children with autism. So
Mhm.
we would love to get all this information from you, Annika, and Shauna as
Yeah.
well, and just compile a list
Yep.
and forward it to anybody who is interested in learning more.
Absolutely. I've got a few listed at the end of the slideshow today.
Cool.
So
Excellent.
Annika, next question for you. I'm going to come back to the person who is answering in, asking in the chat. I will come back to you. I will not forget you. I just want to get through a couple more here. Can you talk about what some of your fears and struggles for yourself, your brother, and Anaya in navigating autism?
I fear for the future. I fear for when I'm not here. What does life look like for her? And Andre, advocacy is major. Even though my brother lives in assisted living, I still am very active in his life, very present. When COVID wasn't around, he came home very often, and I check in weekly with them to see what's going on. I visit weekly. So my concern is advocacy and quality of life. And so what I want to do is make sure that I do my part to figure out how we can instill that they'll be cared for and comfortable, and that there's a community around them when I'm not here.
Absolutely. I always talk about the village. The village is important.
It is. It really is. Do not try to do it by yourself. And I tried that, and there's such a wealth of richness in the village, for real.
Absolutely. What has been your biggest learning curve with Anaya?
My learning curve with Anaya is I had to allow Anaya to show me who she is without me trying to make her be what I think she should be. And it's very easy to do, because when I first got her diagnosis, I went into fix-it mode. So I was reading all the Jenny McCarthy books. I put her on the no gluten, no dairy diet, thinking I could reverse it, because that was the conversation around the time she got her diagnosis. And, thinking she'd grow out of it, even though my brother didn't, but having this, imaginary thoughts for Anaya. And in time, with the care of the community, support from the community, and just spending time, Anaya has blossomed into her own person. And it's actually really cool to watch. She's extremely musical, has a beautiful voice, really talented, loving, warm, bubbly. She's routine. So that has forced me, who's not a very organized person, to become more organized in order for her to have a quality of life. And God is funny like that. And but yeah, that is my major learning curve, is just creating opportunities for Anaya to flourish and become herself, and then just letting that happen, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I'll take a question from the chat box here. It says, do you find that there is prejudice towards getting support?
Are we gonna be real? Yeah.
Well, only way I know how to do it.
Especially in the school board. I'll give you an example. There was like I said earlier, there was a specific school that I knew would fit Anaya's presentation. And I had a meeting with the superintendent of the diagnostic department. And they just would not budge. And I could have fought more, but I think I kind of folded too quickly. They use your address, your location. They use all kinds of excuses why you can't get what you want. And you really have to fight. So that is, even when it comes to funding, they might make a determination, based on how you fill out the application, how much funding you need. Again, that's something else you might have to, because that funding might be the bridge between the access to the supports that child needs, right? And their development. So, they might say, oh, you earn this much, you only need that. But you really have to, that's not always the case. You know, I work full time. And so at one point they capped our funding, but NIA burns through that within 4 months, right? And so like I had to fight and make appeal letters and stuff in order to get that expanded, because I'm a solo parent. And even though I do work full time, you know, most of our income goes into our cost of living. So I do need more in order for her to access more. And I find that funny because it's always been a grievance of mine, because if we invest in our children, especially early or even throughout, because our children develop different, I don't think the cutoff should be age 5, 6, which is what they did with like therapy. If we keep investing, that could be the difference between our children, you know, going to a day program or having the skill set to hold a part-time job and or do something to give back or contribute to the community. And I just don't understand the disconnect with that here in Ontario. And that's been a huge grievance of mine.
Absolutely, thank you. Another question here is, can you recommend any services that parents can use for their children that are affordable, as finances is something that family state is an issue?
I'll make a list. Yes, I can make a list.
Okay.
Where are you located? And also, because location also matters as well.
We'll see when they pop that up there. Okay. So I know that the fees are expensive, but for different services, but the funding that is available, how helpful is that?
It is helpful. So there's different types of funding. If you're not aware already, there is, like, depending on the age of the child, there's, you know, assistance for children with severe disabilities, and that's a monthly amount that you get, and it's also based on your income. So that there's special services at home, which is an annual amount they give you. And that one you might have to advocate a bit more for, because it can be a little bit stingy. So you might have to justify why you might need more based on the needs of your child, but that's also really helpful. With those funding that I've been able to access, respite, life skills training for Anaya, I've been able to access ABA therapy, which is really important. I really, some parents aren't a fan of it. I'm a fan of ABA therapy. I've seen how that stretches Anaya and pushes Anaya to use more of her skills and her verbal communication. I've also been able to utilize it for extracurricular things that I may not have been able to afford just on my own. So things like Taekwondo or her music class, which she's been a part of for like maybe 7, 8 years. And now Naya's like, you know, a yellow belt in Taekwondo, and she also plays the piano quite fluently. So I find those fundings really, really helpful. And I think it's really important. And then as your child ages, you can go after passport funding, which is kind of the replacement for special services at home.
Yes, thank you. Someone, did they have me a comment about services being more interested in filling out forms to get to the services versus actually providing the services? Yeah, right. And they just want to know if you had the same experience.
Yeah, I hate forms. But and I actually know someone who's has a business, which I don't know if she's still doing it, but I can message her for you, and then I will provide her connection in the list of resources that I'll submit, where she was actually supporting parents, because the forms can be overwhelming. They'll mail you a document and it's like 10 to 18 pages long. And yeah, and you do need support. So like the first time I applied for special services at home, I believe I had to go to Geneva Center to get help. And then I then accessed a friend who runs a small business assisting parents getting funding, and her help was amazing. She knew exactly what to put. You really have to like play up the severities of your children's needs in order to be considered for, you know, a decent amount, and she was able to do that. So yes, I will actually put her information down after I confirm with her if she's still running it. That was really helpful.
Wonderful. Okay, and this last question is actually also the same as my last question. So what advice can you give to the parents for the first time with a child with autism and have the same kind of feelings that you had when you first heard? What advice would you give?
I would say, be prepared for the journey. I read once that like having a child with autism is like packing your suitcase and preparing for a trip to the Caribbean, but being dropped off in Switzerland. And even though Switzerland is, a beautiful place, you were prepared for the Caribbean. So you have to navigate Switzerland, right? And learn it and be prepared for the time that you're there. So I just say it is hard. Tap into resources, tap into your community, find out who your community is, create community if you don't have one initially, by, attending the support groups, events like this, asking questions, reaching out to your local agencies and finding out what is available. Resources and support is huge, and that will be what will help you get through this and give you hope, in terms of planning and building a future for you and your child, or you and your loved one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, you did promise us an opportunity to meet Nye. Is that still gonna happen?
Do you guys see her floating around? Nye, do you want to come say hi? Yes. Okay, come say hi. Say hi.
Hi, Seana.
Hi, Nye. How are you?
Hi, Seana. I'm fine, thank you.
Very good. Nice to see you.
That was all you get, guys.
That is more than enough sometimes.
Yeah.
It's better than, being ignored. So, hey,
Yes,
she did her part.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Annika.
Thank you for having us.
I hope you stay, for further questions that may come up.
I will.
But I mean, we're looking forward to hearing and receiving some information that people have been asking for.
I will. I'll put it together and send it before the end of the week.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Don't go too far now.
I won't. I'll just turn my camera off.
All right. Okay. So I'll jump back in. All right. So as mentioned, we talked about finances definitely being a big barrier. And I also recognize that even wait times to get to services is also a huge barrier. And so I want to dedicate a chunk of time just to really talk about tips and tricks that you can probably make happen at home to help with some of the development. And most of the work that you need, I mean, some of us, the millennials don't have printers anymore, but it's a good investment for what I'm going to talk to you about, as well as most things you can find in dollar store. So, after the lockdown and we have a little more freedom, there's little things you can find that to make creativity happen. So I'm going to touch first on the communication. So there is a specific part of the autism where there is a communication breakdown. And so a huge thing is to build on language skills. And so one thing that I find, which I mentioned the printer, or even the color printers, might be a little bit out of your price range. So use your village, is finding pictures that will work to help support the communication. Because we know that people with autism do well with predictability, you want to help lower their anxiety. And so a lot of that depends on whether or not you can help communicate what is coming next for them. So if there is a doctor's visit, we want to create a visual. We all have smartphones nowadays, so taking pictures when you go to the doctor's office, whether it be the outside of the building, taking a picture of your local park when you want to communicate you're going to be going to the park. And it's not a matter of, they don't have the language. And so, I'm trying to oh my gosh, I can't speak English now, infantilize them. And so, looking to dumb them down with pictures, but it also helps when they're ready to communicate with you, that there's consistency in the language. And so one trick is to use real life pairing with verbal pairing. So if you're going to offer an apple, you're going to make sure you're always labeling and say, would you like an apple? And encourage them to then repeat back to you, apple, or yes, can I have an apple? So that way there's some identification. And then you're working on the back and forth a bit. Then you're going to be looking at using the real life item paired with a picture and a verbal. So that way they're learning that you don't always have to have the present item, physical item, to be able to ask for something. They may have the picture that they want to ask for something later on that may not be readily available. And so you can communicate with them using a picture afterwards. But you're creating the sequence to help train the brain that the physical item matches the verbal, which is matching the picture. And then eventually you're able to move away from having the physical item and just pairing the verbal with the picture. And that exchange, you may hear about it later on down the line with services, is the picture exchange communication system. Short form, they call it PECS. And so what that is teaching them that they can ask for items with just using basic pictures. And so this works well with those who are verbal, those who may have a dual diagnosis and may have intellectual disability, and does work with those who are nonverbal as well. And so once you start creating that language, you're helping build independence for when they want to ask you for things. As they continue to learn more, then you can pair it with like sentence strips, and now they're asking you for, and reading out, I want an apple, or depending on what their cognitive function is, to be able to just use the picture alone. This also is useful for not just physical items. You can also talk about feelings. And so when we talked earlier about developing coping strategies to help with just their environment, one thing you want to do is help label feelings. And I find that it is a huge disservice when we're not doing that for our loved ones, because they don't know how to navigate the real world. There's always, happy and angry, but what about the in between? Like, it's okay for them to be sad. And when we ourselves are feeling sad, it's okay to then say, I am sad. And that gives validation as well for them to be able to share their feelings. What you want to do is build communication versus having behaviors build up because they're not able to communicate what's going on for themselves. As Annika mentioned, routines are helpful wherever it's possible. As I mentioned, it helps reducing anxiety and predictability. So for example, Johnny wakes up, he's expected to use the toilet, brush his teeth, wash his face, change his clothes before breakfast. So that is a lot. And depending on what their cognitive function is, that may be too much, and you might want to shorten it down to just, when I wake up, I use the toilet. I use the toilet, then I brush my teeth. And so you can pair it as like a first, I use the toilet, then I brush my teeth, to really simplify it, to be able to communicate what is the next step in the sequence. Done over a period of time, that does create the routine, and that creates expectation. And like I mentioned, based on cognition, that will develop into independence. Annika had mentioned just, working with her brother and what that looks like in the adult system and having to navigate into that. There is a lot that comes with having ability to create your routines and having independence, and that does help support what kind of day programs that they'll be able to get into and what kind of services that they'll have access to. Visual tools that I mentioned before, like a basic printer, would be helpful. You can create visual schedules. You can create something that's called a social script, and then first and then. When I speak of visual schedules, something that may seem pretty basic to you and I, like brushing our teeth, you would say, okay, go brush your teeth. And you think, okay, no problem. But there are steps that you would have to break down in teaching how to brush their teeth. And you can use visuals for that as well to teach them the life skills. So, we go in and we think, no problem, I turn on the water, I get my toothbrush, toothpaste, but you have to break it down step by step. And so it's, I get my toothbrush, I turn on the faucet, I wet the toothbrush, I turn off the faucet, I get the toothpaste, I open the cap, I squeeze the toothpaste. And so it's when broken down, it's a lot more work than just saying brush your teeth. So when I talk about visuals, here are a few examples. When we talk about a social script to help with some of the anxiety and predictability, using Google helps because you can find images that are relatable in terms of our skin color. That is what you predominantly want. That way there's some identification with the picture that you're talking about. You can go ahead and just pair different images together on Google to create the image you want to communicate. And then eventually, if you're into different services, they will have a specific program to help build you these type of visuals. But a social script is a step-by-step when you're prepping, for example, going to the dental office. So if you're going to the dental office, when I go to the dental office, I may feel scared. It's okay to feel scared. Mommy's coming with me. I can hold mom's hand. I can count to 5. I can take deep breaths. Mommy will be happy. So breaking that down step by step like that helps give the message as to what the expectation is to help lower the fear in going to the dentist. Coupled with lots of praise, verbal praise when they are doing things that may seem minuscule to us, it does build the skill and the expectation of what is desired for them when we are giving verbal praise. When you think about, having a child doing potty training, for example, they pee pee in the toilet and you say, "Yay, good job." Same concepts, but for the applicable scenarios. When we talk about visual schedules, and Annika was very good at explaining how Anaya, gets up, she gets her breakfast, she's able to do A, B, C, D. This is the visual example of visual schedule that is helpful to help, just label what they should be able to do once they're able to understand what the pictures are. You can't jump into pictures right away unless they know what the pictures represent. Otherwise, it's just artwork on the wall, okay? So one thing I want to talk about is sensory input. Individuals with autism, there is a sensory component. When I talked earlier about the flailing of the hands, the rocking back and forth, that does speak to some of their sensory needs. And for you to help them with, emotional regulation, you have to understand what they are interested in and what their aversion is to. And the only way to find that out is to try different things, unless they're giving you very clear signs as to what will work for them. So when we talk about auditory, it could be something as playing music. It could be as simple as at nighttime you use a noise machine to help with decreasing the anxiety and creating them an environment that is therapeutic. If there's an aversion to it, then you want to have noise canceling headphones, whether you're going outside. Let's say you had to go to the grocery store, or back when places of worship was open, you may have noise canceling headphones. Yes, it does make your individual look identifiable, but you have to weigh the risk as to being identifiable versus having a meltdown because their sensory needs are not being met. When you talk about visual, if they are someone who's interested in that, there's, movies, things that we typically like. So movies, kaleidoscopes, because that stimulates your eyes. And then if there's an aversion, again, sunglasses, minimal screen time, ensuring that there are slower paced items in front of them. So whether it be something that's colorful but is stagnant, or if you're watching something on the television, it's not the fast paced television shows, it's something a little bit slower. That way that helps with their baseline. If they have an oral interest, then chewing gum, blowing bubbles, flavorful food, blowing through a straw, and that helps just to kind of regulate what's going on for them orally. And if there's an aversion, as Black people, we like to cook out all type of spices and flavors. This is not the time. It's not about us. It's about what our individual needs. And so you would use minimal flavors. You would also think about what textures they like or they don't like. If someone likes something crunchy, and we don't want to give them chips all the time, it could be carrots, or they don't like crunchy, and then you have to make sure you're cooking them. So, looking for different ways, tips and tricks to get their sensory needs met. When it comes to tactile, thinking about what their interests may be, you can do nuts and bolts. That helps with the fine motor skills. It's also textured when you think about what a bolt looks like. Water play. Water play sounds very infantile, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be sensory showers. It could be having them set up a small, what are they called? Well, water fountain. That way there's the running water sounds. It could also be buttons that they can press that helps, create different sounds as well. If they're interested in scavenger hunts, and they like the feeling of sand even, you can have pictures and ask them to look for particular objects that are inside sand or inside shaving cream, because that also creates a different type of sensation. It keeps their hands busy as well. If there's an aversion, then you think about, okay, what does that look like, the feeling of different things on their day-to-day basis. So particular clothing may be a trigger, and that's something you'd have to navigate. What kind of fabric works best? I had an individual once who didn't like anything soft and only wanted to wear denim. And so for most of us, you think denim's kind of heavy, it's a little bit rough. but that was something that they were interested in. So you look to invest in pieces that are going to support their emotional regulation. And if they are having to do different tasks, you think about using gloves, because that is something that's consistent, and that way they're not feeling any of the different type of textures. With smell, you can create something like smell bins. Again, most of these things you can find at the dollar store, or you can create them with items in the dollar store, or like Home Depot with nuts and bolts and things of that nature. A scent bin is, you create little bottles. We all typically like smells, right? So, with perfume, whether it be flowers. I'm a lavender oil sometimes kind of person. And so you can create little pots that you put different items in, to help encourage them to try different smells. And that keeps them occupied, and it works their sensory in terms of smell. So whether it be, lemon wedges, whether it be cinnamon, it could be coffee beans, even. So something with strong smells that can help with that. If there's an aversion, then you need to be mindful about things that we may use, whether it be lotion. You want to think of unscented products that, may be a trigger. And think of what kind of smells in your house and try to make them as consistent as possible. Now that can always be difficult, especially when we're cooking different meals. So being mindful, like if there is a aversion to smells, is your loved one able to tolerate candles? And there's a particular candle that, recognize in your house what may work. And so I can burn this candle while I'm cooking, or they can have those glade scent smells in their room while I'm cooking, things like that to help navigate that. And then when I think about vestibular and proprioceptive input, big words, but it does come down to movement and balance. And so looking at a trampoline is helpful to help meet that need. I put weights on this list, and that could be when, like, for example, they're going out for a walk, you may put weighted things in their backpack to have some of the deep pressure on their shoulders. When they're laying down, maybe a weighted blanket also is supportive. Swings at the park are helpful. And if you're able to invest in a rocking chair, that also is proprioceptive. And so being mindful that those are all the different things. And it doesn't have to be things expensive either. Like if you can't afford to get a trampoline, you may suffice with having them help with laundry, and then you're building life skills, and they're expected to carry, the laundry bin up and down the stairs. And that helps with the proprioceptive. Jasmine, I think there's a comment in the chat box if you can help me out there. If there's an aversion to vestibular and proprioceptive input, then you'll notice there's a bit of an imbalance, a little bit of equilibrium off. You might see them not want to get into elevators or escalators. If they have to use stairs, you'll see them hold on tightly. And so trying to navigate paths where you can, where there is limits. Now, if you live in an apartment building and you live on like the 15th floor, you're not thinking about going up all 15 flights necessarily. And then the elevator or the stairs may be a bit of a trigger, and that is where you need to build in some of the transition pieces to support them with navigating that.
Sorry, Shauna, we don't have any questions at this time.
Okay.
But Annika did also say that weighted blanket is great for sleep assistance.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have one for myself. it just makes a world of difference. Thank you, Annika. And so like I mentioned, most of these things are things that they use in different centers and different programs to help with encouraging communication and teaching new skills. And these are things that you can do at home. Again, it is hard. Like I mentioned in the very beginning, it is time consuming. It's going to be stressful. So when I say use your village, I really do mean that, because that can mean the difference of one day to give you a bit of a break or to help with some of your tools. Annika spoke about my involvement with Anaya in the past. And so when I was helping Anaya learn some skills, a lot of it really was, okay, here is the layout, and let's see what is it that she knows, because Anaya had been involved in different services in the past. I want to operate from a strength-based place and not have to recreate something that was already done. And so once I recognized Anaya was able to pick up on some of the visuals already, it made it easier for when I said, okay, when we come home from school, we're emptying our lunch bag, and then we're, taking a break or taking a shower. And then even when it comes to packing lunch, like Anaya was A+ superstar in packing her own lunch. I would just sit and watch even sometimes to see whether or not she would try to sneak an extra snack, because listen, I don't blame her. But those are the skills you can build, right? Once you've got a bit of a routine going on. So the next thing I want to do is have some moments of honesty. Um, it's not easy, and I can say that I have the honor of working with people with autism, but I don't have someone, a child with autism, and so I recognize that for me, the conversations may seem like they're easy. It may seem like the work can be easy, but trust me when I say I recognize it's hard. I've worked with lots of families, and you'll see that because you're in it day to day, you're going to find days where you don't want to be consistent. You don't have the capacity to hold on to it. And I encourage people to recognize when that is. There's no blame game in this. For those who are neurotypical, there is no handbook. When you're working with individuals with autism, sure, there may be some evidence based practices and things that you may hear of that work for other persons with autism. But like mentioned earlier, like it's a spectrum. So one thing may not work for one person and it may work for someone else. And the concepts may be the same overall, but they have to be adjusted for individual needs. The strategies are relatively the same as they get older as well, and navigate into adulthood. And I mean, we're not talking about adults just yet, but as they get older, you'll see like they are the same tips and tricks and tools, but then they're modified to where they are more age appropriate, more focused on the cognitive piece of it. And then as a family member, then you have to think about what does that look like for you. So as we move on, I want to talk about behaviors. I think that that's something that it's the piece that makes us feel uncomfortable, especially if your child or your loved one is the person who's having the meltdowns. If you're the one who has to stand there and have people in the community look at you while you're having a meltdown, and then expected to hold it together as the person who supports them and loves them. So some of the behaviors you may see, and this is not an exhaustive list, is self-interest behavior. So whether they're hitting themselves with their hand or hitting their head against a wall, these are fairly common. And so when you work with a service team, whether it includes doctors, then you can help navigate whether they're impactful to their neurodevelopment, whether they're superficial, but nonetheless, hearing it and seeing it, it's still very difficult. I talked about emotional meltdowns, inappropriate touch. You have to recognize that a person with autism still goes through the same developments that we do. And so having to navigate puberty and body changes and what that looks like. A lot of the conversation in regards to the tips and tricks I gave you still apply when it comes to visuals and social scripts to help work through that transition. Physical aggression is a big thing that people tend to shy away from. And so when we talk about shame and guilt in the Black community, already having to stand out, having a loved one with physical aggression then makes you more of a shut-in, and then you're having to deal with these issues on your own. And then you're also putting yourself at risk. And so looking to use your community, looking to set up the environment that is best supportive is probably one of the best approaches you can take. There's going to be verbal aggression because sometimes they cannot verbalize what their thoughts are or how they're processing what's going on in their environment. You may have toileting concerns or maybe a delay in that. And so using some of these visuals to help support that is also very important. And then there's a motor skill disorder, dyspraxia. So then when you get involved with services, you may be looking at using an occupational therapist to help support and build muscle memory for being able to have completing tasks that require larger motor skills. When it comes to approaches, I tell everyone early intervention is always best. And it's not just with children with autism, it's with all children. Nowadays, the rave is about baby sign language. And so that works well for children with autism as well. So whether they're neurotypical or they have autism, baby sign language is something that goes very far. For someone who's worked in group home care, recognizing when someone comes in with basic ASL has been very helpful, especially if it's things like please, toileting, and eating, right? Some of the basic symbols, because that's how they're able to get their needs met. In regards to approach, seeking help from doctors and getting referrals, as Annika mentioned, advocacy is huge. And so wait lists are long as well, but you need to be able to push And again, the fight then becomes more difficult to get access to different services. Like I mentioned, with different agencies now, because they're promoting diversity, you can ask for Black intake workers. You can ask for a support person now. It's actually part of the, I'm going to get this wrong if I think about it, Ministry of Child and Social Services. When you are talking about your network, your village, that you are able to have a resource person as someone who supports in transitions to different accesses to services. Consistency and predictability is your best friend. Routine as much as possible is huge. And then thinking about variety of rewards. So whether it be praise, whether it be tokens like stickers, if your individual has a taking to food items, then you have to look at how to, that one's a little bit tricky by the way, but looking at how you can build that in small measures, because what I find with the fixation with autism, if you get stuck with food rewards solely, then you are also on the balance of creating some bit of a fixation towards food, and then that's a other type of issue you have to kind of work through. So that one's very, very, very particular. It has to come with a very strategic plan. Planned ignoring towards undesired behaviors, which can be hard. In the day-to-day world, you see something you don't like, you react to it. When it comes to living with children with autism, if there is a need for attention, that is the function of the behavior, then you need to be very mindful as to how you're responding. So if they do something you don't like, let's say they spilled their water, and your response was, oh, again, you're spilling the water, you've now created a reward. It may be a negative reward, but it's a reward nonetheless. You know that saying about negative attention is better than no attention? The same thing applies here. And so one thing you want to do is make sure you're giving praise for things that you want to see, and ignoring things you don't want to see as creating a pattern. Unless there's a safety concern, obviously then you have to address it, right? Timers and visuals. So I mentioned visuals earlier on and how to build around that, but timers are also helpful. They have ones that have light that flash if someone doesn't like the noise portion because of their auditory sensory input. You've got ones with sound if that works for you. Most of the school programs have those big ones that have like the red countdown on it. I am not suggesting that to you. Those clocks alone are like $70. It's not in the price range. Dollarama actually sells small timers, like in the cooking section, you know, little Betty Crocker circle ones or ones that actually have a countdown on it that you can set. They also have ones that you can clip onto your individual. So that way, if they're someone that bounces around or walks up and down, when the timer goes off, it is with them as well. So that is something a little more affordable. And I think they're like $3 now. So those are some tips and tricks there. And so I want to talk about what to do. When I think about difficult conversations, for yourself, you have to have a conversation with yourself as to what you can handle. And if it's not within your bandwidth, that is okay. Then you need to look for support. And so whether you're looking for professional support for yourself, not talking about your loved one, to help with the guilt that comes with having an individual with autism, guilty that you can't provide the life that you had expected them to have, dealing with the grief and loss of what, you know, you would have loved for them. So getting individuals, so Annika mentioned a support group or a therapist if you can afford it, but thinking about that as part of the overall treatment and intervention. I always talk about the village, no matter if you're neurotypical or not, there's a reason why we have support systems. And then I think about getting professionals for your loved one. I know we talk about having Black professionals to help with intervention. I will always continue to advocate for that. When you're in a position that you don't have that, then I want you to be able to advocate even more. I think about an individual I used to work with who was living in group home care, and you know, the lotion that they provided for this individual didn't make sense to me. It's like this watered down stuff that doesn't work. And I was like, this doesn't work for his skin. When it came to hair, it was like Pantene Pro V. And I was like, whose hair does this work for? So even thinking about things that may seem simple like that, those are things and ways you can advocate for your loved one. And then having to think about if medication is even a consideration. That one's very tricky as well because of our history with medical professions and how we've navigated medication. But even if you are in a position where you feel like you need to have medication, go in there with a plan. Like that is my advice for you about that, is to recognize what is the medication. The doctors are actually expected, as well as the pharmacies, to give you, it's called a pack med sheet. So basically all the information related to the medication. And so find out what the plan is. Like, what is the medication? What is the dosage? What is the dosage increase or decrease plan look like? Find out what is the specific observable change that you're looking for to know if the medication is working. Because you don't want to get to a place where the medication just sits and they just add on top of it because it was just already existing. That doesn't help. If it's not doing what it needs to do, if it's not completing what the intended purpose is for, then we need to figure out a way to decrease and move on to something else. Now, that in itself is scary because overall, when it comes to medication, everybody responds differently. And so when it comes to our loved ones and how we are administering medication, it does become a trial and error, which is very scary. And so when you think about, they've given persons with autism Ritalin before, and then you have to recognize when they're having a spike in behaviors versus a decrease. And that's terrifying because if you're already struggling with the behaviors, imagining a spike in it, right? And so having to know when it's time to say, this is not it. Like, this is not working out. Like, this is what I'm seeing. When you're preparing for the long run, I want you to keep notes, like just take notes of everything. Being your own historian is going to mean a world of difference. Working in the field, a lot of times I'm asking families like, do you have a copy of the psychological report? Or can you tell me about this? Or, what have they liked and disliked? And families like, I think this would happen, or I'm not sure. I think this is the medication I tried, but I'm not sure. And then, we're having to then start over and reinvent the wheel versus build on all the hard work that you've already done as the loved one, as the caregiver. And so when it comes to any type of paperwork, any type of note taking, do it as best as you can. Like, the work is already hard. Now I'm asking you to, keep notes, but this will also inform decisions in the long run. And so everything that I've presented to you in terms of tips and tricks really comes down to paper and writing notes, printing pictures, and dollar store items to help support some of the sensory need. And then you for yourself have to really figure out, is the goal realistic for everyone involved? It may not be about you. So like Annika said, in terms of her learning curve with Anaya, is giving Naya an opportunity to really come into her own. And what does that look like? And so when we think about what is best for our loved ones, are they able to advocate? Are they able to say what they like, what they don't like? And if they're showing you they don't like something, are you going to press the item of saying, no, you have to have it? I'll give you an example. So when I think about some of the individuals I work with who have an aversion to vegetables, it's a sensory thing, or whether they look at it and it's on their plate. Salad is number one hate list for most of my clients. We have to think, okay, am I going to get into a whole scuffle over some salad? And you have to think to yourself, okay, what are my options here? Okay, instead of having a salad, do I look at the multivitamins? Do I think about, getting greens in a shake? Do I look at pureeing vegetables and making that the sauce for the spaghetti that they think is regular tomato sauce? So thinking about those different things, working from what they're able to handle, and knowing that this is really about giving them the quality of life that they want to have for themselves. Just wanted to pop up a few resources. I know that someone in the comments made a mention in regards to Sturdy Place and not having a great experience. That's unfortunate. I mean, I've heard this before for different agencies actually, but Sturdy Place is one of the places to help getting a diagnosis. And for our community, getting labeled is not something we want to do, but being able to get a label also helps open up doors to funds and services, as Annika mentioned, in regards to being able to pay for some of the services that came up. So here's just a very short list. I know Annika mentioned a few more as well, where you can find some information and you can speak to people about what's going on. And most of these places have intake workers that can direct you as to what they will think is needed. Most of these places have connections, like they're all under one ministry, and they tend to sit at some similar tables as well and speak about different profiles or people that fit with different kind of programming, or may have a connection because they know somebody. The field is relatively small. And so take a look and see, give a call if you need to give a call and see what is available. And then as your loved one gets older, I mean, that's a different conversation for another day, but recognizing that services are going to change, access to resources are going to change, processes for receiving funding is also going to change. And then thinking about the long-term care. I mean, and Annika talked about one of her fears being what would happen or how would they be taken care of if something should happen to her. These are conversations that we have to have regardless with neurotypical folk, but also recognizing that people with disabilities are very vulnerable. And so we want to build a world as best as we can to keep them as safe as we can. And it's no matter which way I flip it for you all, it's a lot of work and it's hard. So when I say use your village, I definitely mean it. So I've talked at you for about an hour. Thank you everyone for joining, and I definitely am open to some more questions.
Yes, amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Seana, for all the insight. And thank you, Annika, for sharing your experiences. It was very wonderful and informative to hear the both of you to speak about your experiences. And of course, thank you for answering the questions that came in as well. We had a lot of amazing questions, and I encourage more questions as well. Please come in and just share your questions in the chat or the Q&A section. I guess we could start off by, I have a question actually that I'd like to start off with if possible. So how can parents best collaborate with their children's teachers and school educators to ensure success? And how can they best advocate for their children's educational experiences?
Annika, do you want to take this one or do you want me to take it?
We can tag team. So you can start, Seana. I'm just gonna get my thoughts together.
No worries. So as Annika mentioned earlier, it can be a very difficult process. As a professional in the field, sometimes it's hard working with other professionals because it's like, I'm a teacher and I know how to teach. And I'm like, I work with autism. I live autism. And so, you know, there's a bit of a clash, but regardless, you have to recognize that you are always going to be the person who knows your child best. You may not understand the diagnosis best sometimes, and that may be a hard pill to swallow, but recognizing that you also know your child's likes and dislikes. So when it comes to getting a individualized education plan, see that as a way to help have the conversation as to what your child needs. So saying, you know, if they said, okay, your child is expected to sit there for 3 hours straight and do desk work, if that's not in your kid's capability, that's not going to work. And then you're going to get into a cycle where they're going to be like, they are refusing to do work, they are oppositional. Well, no, I made it very clear that's not what works for my child. And so, you know, I know that I worked with Annika in terms of going into her daughter's school and looking at what is available to them. Annika has been like a powerhouse in advocating for Naya, and even said like, I'll provide staffing if I have to. But even looking at what sensory activities they have, because teachers are like, they're not always looking to out how to figure out these sensory activities, and that can make a difference as well. So when having a conversation with teachers, it's looking at, you know, what are my child's sensory needs that help with their emotional regulation, and building that into their education plan. Like ideally, you want them to succeed.
And just to add to that, I would say building a presence. So just being there from the beginning. I think the first mistake I made when I mentioned earlier in Naya's academic career, I was intimidated. And so I just pulled her out and ran, and I went to a paid service. But then re-emerging back into the space, I then was equipped with support, just being a presence, being there, making your requests known, and not being afraid to ask for, someone higher to, push forward what you need, because it's really just left up to you and the supports around you. I also know of an agency that advocates for families as well. And I will add that to the resource list. So if maybe it's hard for you to find your voice, there's someone who she's really well versed in navigating the system. Her son is also on the spectrum, but he's an adult now, but she knows her way around. She's a powerhouse herself, and she advocates on behalf of parents. So I'll also add that in the list of resources.
Good, thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. We definitely need to get together and put this resource list and get it out to everyone. So thank you.
I see a question in the chat box here that says,
yeah.
any suggestions for how to care for yourself as a caregiver? Annie, do you want this one?
Yeah. Respite is a wonderful thing. And do not be ashamed to use it. You are not a superhero. You are human and you are tired. And, you know, use it. That's what ACSD funding is for. That's what SSSH funding is for. You know, those two fundings specifically is for, you know, paying an outside party or agency to help. Naya has done overnight respite in agencies. She's done private. I prefer private personally. So I prefer building a relationship with one particular care provider and having them come into our home, adapt to our culture. And you know, that works for me and Anaya and my anxiety, but definitely tapping into your resources to access that and take the time you need. Whether it's just, you know, a few hours on a Saturday. You know, I had that where I had a respite worker come in, and just every other Saturday, Naya's gone for the day. She's gone and she's doing something social that works for her, interacting with her peers. You know, she was at science center and this and that and doing different things. And I can just sleep or get my nails done or get a massage or just do something to make me feel like me. That's very necessary, because when you're rejuvenated, you can return back to the space refreshed and ready to go again. You know, it's not a race, it's a marathon, and you have to pace yourself and find little things along the way to help to take care of yourself as you're on this journey.
I think we gotta put that on a t-shirt. It's not a race, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
I like that. Just to add to that, I think that there's a lot of guilt that comes with leaving your child with somebody else. Knowing that they have these needs. What if they have a meltdown while I'm gone? What if, you know, what if we get stuck in that cycle? And it may be, you know, they're only taking, you know, their child to the park. And it's like, well, I could do that. I don't need someone to take them to the park. We know you can do it, but you also need to be able to rejuvenate, as Annika mentioned. And so, yes, you can skip one park day. You can have someone come in, whether it be a friend who understands the diagnosis, to, you know, take them out for ice cream, take them out for a walk, play in the park for a little bit. Maybe they go and they do a scavenger hunt, picking up leaves and build art projects. And that way it just gives you an opportunity to do something else. So it doesn't have to be grandiose. It also doesn't have to be expensive, but it's important. So those are ways that I would suggest as a caregiver, to take time and make time for yourself.
And just adding on to that, how can families, I guess, support in family members and community members? How can we support individuals who are caring for a family member or friend with autism?
Yes, I'm going to be very frank with all of you. There is no reward for doing it all. Okay, you're not going to get a gold medal to do it all. And when it comes to families or people who feel like they have relationships, especially in the Black community, we don't hold back. We feel the need to say something sometimes when it's not even our business. Okay, and so recognizing that if someone is making a comment about your child that doesn't fit, or making an assumption that doesn't work, or it's not in your best interest, let them know. Like, it's okay to let, you know, the parent bear come out and say, this is not your place right now. And say, like, this is how you can help me. You want to help me? How about you cook dinner for me once in a while? How about you come to my house and just sit on the couch while I go in the bathroom and light a candle and, you know, have my own mantra happening. But when they're overstepping, you gotta check them. Yeah, Annie, go ahead.
You know, I just to add to that, you're right. For a while, I didn't rely on family. I solely relied on professional care. There was like a guilt that like I didn't think my family wanted to be bothered with it. I didn't want to burden my family, quote, burden my family members.
Yeah.
But you'd be so surprised. Like lately, my aunt and my cousin have stepped up to be really supportive. My younger cousin, her name is Jada. She's actually going to college for social services as well, and she's taken she's developed a relationship with Anaya. So I think one of the things we need to do is just get out of our heads and really start looking around at the family members that may fit with the presentation of your child or may be empathetic or who are willing, and start building bonds. I did this late in the game, but it's been happening, and Naya now has like a bond with some of her cousins, which is great because Jada's younger than me, so she'll be around when I'm not, and that's how you begin to build that community around your child. Just bring them to the function, don't stay at home, go to the places. Yes, your child will be have behaviors and have moments, but like, how is the family going to connect with your child if they don't know who they are? So don't hide, just form those bonds. It's really important.
And bringing the family in is also great in terms of like the consistency that we talked about earlier. Like, how, like you mentioned, it's more about when we talk about it, but if you're not around, like you need someone who knows how to create life skills with Anaya or your loved one, or know how to, educate and teach and to get some of the desired outcomes. So, bring them along, even if it's, you're going to meet with professionals, bring someone along because that way they're able to say from a different perspective what they see, but also just to talk about like, some of the approaches, and it's not one person having to hold it all.
And just act as a support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I believe we had a question in the chat. If I understand correctly, the question is asking, what if someone gets a misdiagnosis and finds out they have autism later on in life? I believe this is the question.
Okay. Do you want me to go with that one, Annika?
Yeah, to you.
Okay, no worries. No worries. It's okay if the diagnosis happens later. I have someone I'm working with now who wasn't diagnosed till the age of 30. And you can imagine, like, when we talk about early intervention to make a difference, 30 is a lot later in the game. And so by 30, they've already developed particular behaviors. They've become accustomed to different coping skills for various things. And so when you are diagnosed later on, it's still managing to use some of the tips and tricks I talked about, but there's a point where you have to go through the rough patch of breaking some of the behaviors. And so when that happens and you're starting to put like boundaries in place and structure, you're going to see behaviors off the rail until you realize they're able to come down and fit into what some of the expectation is. And then you also recognize that as adults, sometimes they may not fit that expectation. They've become accustomed to doing things how they have, just like anyone else, like half the time some of us ourselves, right? And so you have to recognize what is realistic for them. And if it's not realistic, then you have to think about alternative ways as to how they can navigate the system. And then look at different funding as to how to support that person depending on what their needs are. So when you're diagnosed later on, there's still value in operating and doing interventions based on what works best for persons with autism, but having a hard conversation as to whether or not it's within their bandwidth is probably the most difficult part.
And how would the community support system change or shift if that were the case?
By that time when they're older, you might lose a few friends and a few people who've seen some of the rougher patches. But there's a bit of a different approach. Depends on if you're talking about like later on before the age of 16 or talking about 16 and up. Because before the age of 16, you still have access to all of the different types of services that would be available for children and youth. And so you can get them into a intake place to have them do an assessment, to meet with behavior therapists and whatnot. After the age of 16, it becomes very tricky, but you do have to use an intake line and then figure out from there whether or not they are connected to Developmental Services Ontario. You then have to look to see whether or not there's any funding available. You have to apply for passport funding. There are some agencies, depending on what the presentation of behaviors look like, that will pay for staffing to support. and do community work and do some of the life skill building. But those are, you have to reach out to be able to find out whether or not they, like that specific agency is able to help with what's going on. But you always, no matter what, always have to care for yourself, use your village as best as you can, and recognize when you've reached your own personal bandwidth.
So just to add to that, tapping into DSO, Disability Services Ontario, is really helpful because, you know, it's just kind of like a centralized location of everything. Also, before COVID, they would have like fairs and stuff like that.
Yes.
So you could, I attend them. I used to attend them almost every year, even though I knew what was there, but you'd still discover something new. You'll discover new respite agencies, culturally connected respite agencies that you didn't know, private stuff that you might want to tap into more so than maybe something that more works for your home or your culture, more so than maybe something that's more public. So there's tons of little gems. And so tapping into the DSO, you'll get emails and updates about different activities and community events that will give you more information and access to stuff.
And being connected to so I just wanted to add, being connected to DSO is very important because that is their lifelong connection. The DSO will keep their record and information and follow them like throughout. So if your person is someone who eventually is unable to be supported at home, the DSO is someone who will put together a portfolio and present them to long-term care placements should they need that. So the DSO is huge, very important. 16 and up.
Yeah, excellent resources that you mentioned. I guess I'm not sure if you're able to share the names of some of them at this time, or if not, it's okay. We can write them down and add them to the resources. Okay, so I don't see any chats or I don't see any questions or comments in the chat at this time. However, I will ask, are either of you able to speak on the challenges that schools are facing to ensure that children diagnosed on the spectrum are not lost through the cracks due to the cutbacks in funding during the pandemic?
Can you repeat that for me one more time?
Sure. So are either of you able to speak on the challenges that schools are facing to ensure that children diagnosed on the spectrum are not lost through the cracks due to funding cutbacks in the province, or challenges in the shifting of school structure during the pandemic?
During the pandemic, there hasn't been a great understanding of the pandemic, first of all. I think one thing we're all seeing is information changes and approaches change very frequently. So when it comes to individuals, whether like of all disabilities and diagnoses, they're at a bit of a loss at the moment. And there aren't any specific ways or interventions that they've had to figure this out. Families are looking to rely on individual support in their family homes. There are agencies that are still operating in the community. So if you are in a place where you are struggling and need community support, that is still very much real, and they have to come through with, you know, the safety measures, and you have to work through some of that. But in regards to the school system, they don't have an answer, and it's quite unfortunate that even before COVID took place, they didn't have an answer for a lot of the individuals. It was kind of like daytime babysitting, or they put them in a diagnostic classroom where everybody is just sitting there all day long, just sitting. So not to speak ill of the school board, but recognizing that sometimes they are not in a position where they have people who are trained. I think about, I can't remember exactly the date, so don't quote me on this one, but there was a few years ago where they made a cut to child and youth workers in the school system and decided to put more education assistants. And it's like, okay, but the training is not the same. And so unfortunately, everything does come down to costs inside the school boards, plural. And so there is no actual answer, unfortunately, as to how to navigate the gaps at the moment, just because nobody knows how to navigate COVID.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Even neurotypical kids even are
struggling.
Yeah. I mean, it's a conversation I've had with my family that like pretty much all elementary school children at this point from 2019 to now, their entire social realm is going to be so different. They're not going to know what people look like without masks on, or how to, give hugs or hands. Remember when handshakes were part of professional courtesy? Like,
Yeah.
none of that. So it's a whole new way of navigating now.
And so do either of you have any recommendations for what community groups can do to fill the gaps between what is offered and what is missing?
Definitely, I would say training within therapy. So ABA therapy is helpful, academic, offering specialized tutoring, filling in those gaps. So for me, like I invested a lot of money into funding, academic training for Anaya. So reading and writing, those things, because you would be surprised what our children can learn once it's filtered out through a therapy through the right therapeutic way. And so one of the best learning tools for Naya has been ABA therapy. And unfortunately, it's very limited for whom can access it here in our province. It cuts off, they say until 18, but really the focus is 6 and under. And so, accessing that or finding ways that we can, bring therapists, even if we provide, after school ABA based, programs where we implement some of those therapeutic tasks and measures in our programs, that would really help. Just finding ways for our children to access more assistance is how community services can fill the gap. Offering a holistic respite or culturally based respite. So, as Black or Caribbean family, or Afro-Caribbean families, or just offering, it might be easier families of different cultures to connect with respite and programs that connect culturally with them. So those are some of the ways I think would kind of make this easier for families. Somehow, ABA therapy, is extremely expensive, but it's so, I like it. Some parents don't. It really just differs on how your child receives information. But like, it gave Anaya a chunk of life skills, a chunk of language, and it's just so expensive. It averages like $60 to $100 an hour. So even if you have funding, you burn through that really quickly. So, having agencies that are able to hire therapists, even on a part-time basis, and provide some type of programming would be extremely instrumental in terms of development and assistance to families.
Absolutely. I think a big part of it as well, just in terms of the gaps and things that communities can be doing, is when you find yourself attached to any type of services, being, like, when we talk about advocacy, being the person to push. And when you say something like, I would like a Black intake worker, or I would like someone who understands the cultural implications, they have to start shifting their thinking. Like, they don't have a choice. And when I think about how we as Black people have become conditioned to say less, just based on how we've operated throughout history, and what's been done to us, we get to a place where we feel, we'll take whatever there's someone's giving us. It's okay to say that it's not good enough. And it's not a matter of being difficult or, whatever you may feel, because there are people who do it who are not Black or occupy brown bodies, and they're able to get results. And so recognizing that is something that you have to say when you are connected to any community services. And then on top of that, just say, even if you are attached to someone, a worker who is not Black, then you say, this is how we do it. And this is how, I expect it to be done based on culture, based on what works for my child and our household. But also recognizing that if you don't have the tips and tricks yourself about operating from a diagnostic perspective, then being able to collaborate and to say that, this is what's missing. I know this part, you may know this part. How do we meet in the middle?
Excellent.
I saw in the comment section here in regards to adults getting a psychologist for an assessment. Those are hard to come by. So be patient. Some psychologists don't have any experience with autism, and so that can be tricky. For those who live in the Scarborough area, I mean, my family has an aversion to a particular hospital. However, this hospital does actually have a lot of connections, and that is Centenary. Centenary is, I know, but
Sorry.
that's my own personal bias. Well, clearly not personal. You've got issues too. But they do have access to resources. Again, it comes down to advocating for how to navigate that, because they will let things slide.
Children's Bloorview Hospital is actually excellent as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
out of the area, but like I'm Queen Drive out the area. So if you have to if you have to go, to Bayview or Markham, if you can access it, try that. They also have resources as well.
They've got. I mean, I'm not going to say that person's name, but they've got a great developmental pediatrician out at Bloorview, who advocates and listens and works well. So if your child does end up needing medication, and you want a developmental pediatrician, because to be fair, general practitioners don't always know how to prescribe and monitor medication. Bloorview is somewhere that is a great resource.
Another doctor, I'm going to actually say her name, is Dr. Neal. She's at the Scarborough Center for Healthy Communities at Markham and Lawrence. She actually specializes, she's a Black doctor, and she actually specializes with individuals with ASD and ADD and ADHD. That is her specialty. So you can access her through that clinic, and she's incredible.
Excellent. Thank you guys for the resources and information. Hopefully we can get some Durham-based ones as well on the list.
No, Shayla's Voice is a good one. She's Shayla's Voice. I don't know if you've heard, but Shayla's Voice is actually a resource website where they rate all the services that are offered for individuals with exceptionalities and ASD. They have the list of the resources on the site and then a rating. And you can also get in contact with Anissa, who she's also an autism mom as well.
Yeah, and they're based in Durham.
Anisha Martin.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you guys.
Yes, and she's in Durham.
Excellent. Okay, so we are coming to the end of the evening. So I do want to give you guys both an opportunity to share your contact information if you would like as well. And also, I didn't get to dive deep into all the fantastic work that you do, Annika, at Anaya's Haven. So if you'd like to share that information as well, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, so Anaya, thanks. Anaya's Haven is something that I am still developing, but I started offering holistic respite to families in the community 4 or 5 years ago I started. So there are 1 or 2 families that I connected with in Scarborough, and I would offer, culturally based respite to them. And then with the next phase of Anaya's Haven is to provide support and advocacy to families, especially in the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. So basically letting them know what we're doing here today, providing conversation, one-to-one support, helping out fill out forms, providing resources, as well tapped on with the respite, and having the long-term goal is to create a space where they can come and have respite and give families a break.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is it okay if I put your email in the chat for individuals to connect with you afterwards?
Yes, pre-COVID, I was doing respite. Now we're just working on trying to figure out what we can do digitally until COVID lets up. And you can reach me at anayashaven@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at anayashaven.
Yes, for myself, I occasionally am doing consultant work. I have in the past, and so I'm open to reaching out and being able to answer any questions. So I'm fine if people want to throw my email in there as well.
Excellent. I will put your email in the chat as well, Seana. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending tonight's workshop. We are so happy to have you here. Hi, Naya. And I will also put Kujenga's website in the chat as well, in case anyone would